Hey y'all, how's everybody doing? It's a rare occasion when a customer calls me and says, you got to hold up on what you're doing, we're making changes. And it stops me in my tracks. I don't have anything else to do. But now I've got time to do a video. So today I just stopped everything and I'm doing a video. I got 3 stories in this video. I think they're going to be good. Y'all ready? All right, here we go.
Still remember, cannot forget the flower in your hair. Looking forward, listen to my
Here's an email from DS. Those are his initials. This occurred in February of 2020, just a couple of months ago, Central North Carolina. He writes, I left home on my way to work about 30 minutes to an hour before sunrise. On this morning, I actually left on time, but normally I didn't. I was in a hurry to shave off 5 minutes of my transit time by being heavy-footed on the accelerator. I live in a rural area, but I wouldn't call it deep country. There are still houses around and towns just 10 to 15-minute rides in any direction. But nonetheless, still rural with a large open fields and thick patches of woods. Some of those patches are quite dense. There's one long straight road with almost no traffic, and it's actually the road I use to make up my time. Yes, I tend to fly down that road. Even when I'm not running late, I will still drive pretty fast. I suppose it's a habit. On this morning, I actually left on time and shouldn't have been in a hurry, but I ended up behind a school bus. At the end of this long road is a highway, and as you get onto the highway, you don't always have the opportunity to make a quick pass. So I took a side road to basically cut the corner and hopefully fly to make it to the highway before that school bus did. Again, I shouldn't have cared. I wasn't late today, but my established pattern always drove me to drive hard in this area. I took 2 turns and was running parallel to the bus, but on the other road now, and in a race to get to the highway before the bus did. A deer stepped into the road and boom, I hit it. My airbag blew up in my face too. If you've ever had an airbag blow up on you, it takes a moment to realize what just happened, for your mind to process things. I stopped and pulled over. The deer had come running top speed across the field and ran right in front of me, and I had no opportunity to react. I checked out my vehicle to examine the damage. The direction he was headed seemed to be a very small continuation of a field, but nearby was one of those thick, dense patches of woods that likely extended a couple of miles in any direction. The deer was laying in the field about 20 feet from the woods. I wanted to make sure it wasn't suffering in case I needed to put it down, but it was very obvious the deer was dead. I suppose my vehicle plus its momentum knocked it several feet off the road. I returned to my vehicle knowing that I had an insurance claim to start. I've heard that insurance companies give people a hard time about hitting a deer, so I needed to get a police report. I sat on the side of the road with a car passing only every 10 or 15 minutes or so, and waiting a little over an hour on a state trooper to arrive. This was not an emergency and my call was not a top priority. While sitting there, the sky brightened and the sun rose, and the deer still lay dead 30 feet off the road and only a few feet from the woods that he was running towards. Eventually, the state trooper arrived and spent 5 minutes printing up a report for me to give to my insurance company in case they needed it. Despite my airbag being deployed, I decided to drive my vehicle back home. The state trooper left and I continued in my original direction looking for a place to turn around. This is a rural area, so turnarounds weren't always readily available. It was probably 1.5 miles to find a suitable place to turn around without feeling like I was infringing on someone's property. I got turned around and headed back towards the accident site and home. The deer I hit, the deer that had laid in the field for the last 2 hours, was gone. During the time it took me to drive 1.5 miles, turn around, and pass by again on my way home, the deer had vanished. Unless there was a bear around, there's nothing else other than a person that could have dragged this deer away so quickly. I pulled over and shut the engine down. I couldn't believe it. Right away, my mind went straight to Bigfoot. I thought this would be a great opportunity to go look for evidence, and then it occurred to me, if this is true, it might not be far away or appreciate me being so close to it. Instinct kicked in and told me to move along and go home. Even though I think it would have been a great encounter with a Bigfoot, I don't actually want to do it unless it's from a vehicle moving 60 miles an hour and just get lucky enough to see one. I damn sure don't want to be face to face with one that might be feeling protective of its family or its food. Who knows how they think or react? My guess is that they are as unpredictable as any human is, so there's literally no way of ever gauging what sort of encounter you might have. So I opted not to risk being close to one. My honest guess is that if a Bigfoot did come out of the woods as soon as I was out of sight, then he probably wouldn't have lingered just behind a tree line. It would have taken its food as far away from the road as possible, but again, who can predict their behavior? So sadly, I went on home after stopping only a few seconds to let my brain process everything that had happened that morning. I told other people about it without hinting at anything about Bigfoot, and people jumped straight to the, he wasn't really dead, or coyotes could have done it. I can't speak for coyotes, but my guess is dragging deer carcasses into the woods isn't really their thing. And I do know deer don't play dead and wait for you to leave. And I do know that the deer was dead. It bothers me that I killed an animal that was just going on about its business because I got in a needless hurry. My mother once told me that haste makes waste. You get in a hurry and you'll make terrible mistakes. In this case, I killed an animal. I think it's not outside the realm of possibility that it was being hunted and herded by a group of Bigfoot and intentionally flushed out in front of a moving vehicle. I don't really believe that part, but wouldn't it be neat to find out that they think that way? I think it's more likely there was a Bigfoot nearby when I hit the deer and it waited patiently on me to leave the scene. It would have needed only to take 2 or 3 steps out of the woodline to collect the prize and disappear again when the area was clear. I felt bad for the deer, but I like telling myself that perhaps I helped feed a family of Bigfoots who were probably wishing I'd get the heck out of there before their breakfast got cold. So that's my story. I didn't see one, I didn't hear one, but something happened, and whatever took that full-size deer purposely waited until it wouldn't be seen. Thanks for reading my story, signed DS. I've never heard a story like that. This is really an original, a new thing that I've heard of Bigfoot quickly taking a roadkill. But I'll tell you this, sometimes you can hit, I've seen them a couple of times in my life. I've never hit a deer with a vehicle. Thankfully, it's always been the car in front of me, a buddy driving in front of me or something. And I'm glad it's him and not me. But I've seen them hit deer and they lay there and they look like they're dead and they may lay there for 10, 15 minutes. And suddenly they just get up and run off. They're just stunned. They're in shock. They're knocked out, whatever. I'm not saying that's the case on this one, but that is a possibility. Now, would it lay there an hour and a half or 2 hours and not be dead? I doubt it. I think it would have got up before then. And don't feel bad about hitting a deer. It's just part, it happens all the time. And you're right. Maybe you did feed a family of Bigfoot. I thought this was a great story, DS, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to write it because it's like brand new information. Or to me it is. I don't know. I don't know about y'all, but it's pretty good to me. Okay, buddy, I appreciate it. All right, here's an email I got last June. Yeah, I'm reaching way back for emails. And this is not an encounter this man had, but it's a secondhand encounter, and it's really good. So here's the email. He writes, "My name is Nick, and for most of my life, I've always been open-minded about unknown creatures like Bigfoot, but I've always leaned more towards believing them to be real. I have yet to experience an encounter, but I know they are real. I didn't think I would ever meet anyone in person who is somewhat adamant about the existence of Sasquatch or had even had an encounter. I would love to share a short story from a friend and coworker of mine that he shared with me. I told him about your channel and the stories that you relate. After he told me his encounter, he seemed enlightened that he was comfortable telling me that I could share his story with you because no one would poke fun at him for the experience. You may not realize it, but there are sightings in Arizona, mainly up on the Mogollon Rim, known as the Mogollon Monster. There seems to be a lot of sightings up there. However, his story takes place in a different part of northern Arizona. Here is his story. His name is Chad, and he doesn't care if you use his name. I'll let you make that decision. His encounter took place on the back roads near Mormon Lake in the Coconino National Forest. He was 13 years old at the time. He was with his best friend at that time and his friend's dad. They were parked up on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere around 2 a.m. watching a meteor shower. As he described it, at the end of the shower, they started the car to get ready to leave. They slowly pulled away and they saw a massive figure run across the front of their car in the headlights. He said it was running like a man. Noticed the dark brown hair and it stood about 8 feet tall. After it reached the other side of the dirt road, it disappeared into the woods. He remembers it like it was yesterday, and I was excited to hear him tell the story. It was a brief encounter, but it was an encounter nonetheless. Another co-worker and him started talking guns, saying if they ever saw one, they would aim and shoot. I told them after hearing these stories from hunters, raising a gun to a squatch is the last time you ever raise a gun. They brushed it off, but I know the truth. They are powerful creatures who can take a shot or two from what I've heard. Maybe hearing this story, others in Arizona will bring you their encounters, and I hope to hear them. Thanks for doing what you do. Well, thanks, Nick, for the secondhand story. They're just as good as firsthand encounters, just as good. And it's evidence, it's good. These stories are the best evidence for the existence of these creatures. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, actually doing an interview for another project, and he was like, who am I to say that this stuff didn't happen? Because he had had an experience too. Real level-headed guy. He's just not prone to make things up. He's right. Who are we to say that these things aren't true? And I hate the guy gets poked fun at, but I've said it before, when you talk about Bigfoot, you're kind of opening yourself up for it. And you have to kind of laugh it off with the people who are messing with you. Hopefully they're not mean. But anyway, Nick, I appreciate the email and it was great. Thank you, buddy. Here's an email from Jared that I got back about a year ago. And I want to read you the last sentence. I'll read it again at the end, but I want to read you the last sentence of his email because it kind of makes me feel bad. But here's what he said. If you read this far, I really appreciate it. I've tried to get this story to someone who cares several times, but no one ever really pays attention. Well, Jared, I know it's taken a while to get to your story. I just have a lot to do, and I've got a new thing coming up that's going to double, maybe triple up on these stories. So if you've sent a story in and it hasn't been read, don't worry. I'm going to get to it. Don't think that I'm ignoring it or your story's not good enough. It's just so many that I can get to in a week. So stand by. Everything's going good. But let me share with you this great story that Jared sent. I think it's great. I'm familiar with the area he's talking about. I actually used to deer hunt down there a little bit. For a couple of years I did, and it is some eerie looking ground down there, but it's great. It's full of wildlife. It's great for hunting and fishing. Here's what he writes. I grew up hunting in southeast Arkansas swamps, just north of Monroe, Louisiana. A few years back, I had an encounter with a creature that I believe is some sort of Sasquatch. One morning during late October, I decided to go fishing in one of the sloughs on my lease. I rode my four-wheeler a mile or so from my camp and parked on the trail about 75 yards from the slough. This slough is 30 yards wide in some places, and it's covered in huge cypress trees, cypress knees, and it's always full of life. Let me stop here. There's probably quite a few people who don't know what a slough is. In river and wetlands, especially in the south, when you have a low depression, the water stays in that area. They're not lakes, they're just old sloughs. They're hard to describe, but they're just wetlands that stay wet all the time. They don't dry up. And it's a great environment for wildlife and cypress trees and big oaks that swell up at the base because of the water. So when you hear slough, you'll know that it's kind of a swamp. It's a deep depression in the woods. So back to Jared's story. Every time I'd go down there, I'd jump a deer or I'd kick up some ducks, but this time there was no wildlife present. The grinnell and the gar weren't even flipping on the top of the black water. I walked down to the water and I began to fish. Shortly after, I finally saw some wildlife. A big white crane crept down the bank looking for a bite to eat, but something scared it off like it saw something and was trying to get away. I wasn't getting any bites where I was, so I walked further down the bank. About the time I decided to make a move, I heard a loud crack from across the water. I scanned the area and I couldn't see anything, so I figured maybe a tree limb fell, but I still kept my eye peeled on that area. The fish weren't biting here either, and I decided to move again. I started trudging through the knee-deep mud, and I decided to look back to see if I had jumped anything, and when I did, I saw a big head pop out from behind a cypress tree across the slough from me. It just stared a hole right through me, a big pointy head with dark eyes and a big fat nose. Eventually, the creature stepped out from behind the tree. It was tall. I don't know exactly the height, but it was over 7 feet. It had long matted hair mixed with a green and rust color, almost like camouflage. It was very well built, and it stood on 2 legs, and it had really long arms. Abruptly, the creature made a whoop sound, and it started to run towards the thicket. I noticed its hair was long, and it looked like moss. It dangled as it swung its arms. As soon as it got to the thicket, it sounded like an elephant moving through the woods. I grabbed my tackle box, and I headed for my ATV. I carry a rifle when I go in there, and I snatched it off the ATV, and I was ready if this thing doubled back on me. Standing there as silent as a mouse, I listened. After a few minutes, it was obvious this thing had moved on. I blazed back to the camp where everyone was, and I told my buddies what had just happened. No one believed me, but after the commotion settled down, one of the guys got me off to the side, and he told me that he knew what I had seen. We called him Little Bill, and then I remembered that he had said that he never went into that area, but he had never mentioned why. I never paid much attention to that. I also have a great uncle who was on the lease many years ago. He had one of the best spots to hunt and had hunted that land since he was a little boy, but at some point years ago, he stopped going down there. He just quit and never came back. It's my belief that the thing I saw is what scared them out of the area. Scared them so bad that my uncle won't even go into the woods anymore. I still go back down to that part of the slough. I'm hoping to get another glimpse of the creature, but I've yet to see it again. I have 2 brothers who hunt the same lease. Although they haven't seen the creature, something follows us on the long walks to our deer stands in the mornings before daylight. You can hear it walking, following you in the darkness. Whether it's that creature or not, I don't know, and I believe that whatever it is does not mean us any harm. If it wanted to hurt any of us, it's had several opportunities. If you read this far, I really appreciate it. I've tried to get this to someone who cares several times, but no one really ever pays attention. Well, Jared, I'm paying attention, brother. I'm paying attention, and I love this story. You know, what can I say about this? It kind of reminds me of the Fouke monster or the Boggy Creek monster, which is really pretty close to where you're talking about. And man, for some reason, these swamp creatures seem to give me the willies a little more than the Highland type Bigfoots. There's just something about those lowland areas that's, even though I love them and I love going into them, there's something real creepy about them. And then to see some kind of monster step out with moss green, rusty hair swinging from its arms and making noises with a big ugly face. Whew, that would scare me out of there too. But buddy, we do care, and your story's important, and I got it done, and I really appreciate you sending it to me. Thanks, man. That's going to wrap another video up. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.
Still remember, cannot forget the flower